Morning. Welcome to the Cory Morgan Show for this May 10th, Monday. It's hard to tell it's mid-May since there's snow on the ground. That global warming's really getting to us, but I guess it melts faster this time of year. If anything, this weather was a godsend to the RCMP and others who wanted to make sure that any counter-protests around Mirror, Alberta and such were kept as low as possible because nobody really wanted to go out in that miserable sleet and rain and weather and stand up for our rights. Well, nobody wanted to, but about 1,500 did. Good morning, Jake and Laura out in Saskatchewan, and Jackie, Heather. Yeah, quite a weekend. Some crazy looking scenes, of people being handcuffed, arrested for the crimes of holding religious services and for the other crime of trying to open a cafe. It's just such a bizarre time, and things aren't getting any better. So I'm going to give a heads up and a warning, and I see Colin DeWolf in the waiting area there too, which is great. I'm going to have a panel on today with some small business owners in Alberta who've been impacted by lockdown restrictions, because again, we keep going into the restrictions, going into the lockdowns, and we don't seem to be measuring the impact that it's having on those who are shut down. You don't see that reported. You don't hear nearly as much about it as we should, because you really, before you do anything as intrusive as a lockdown, a government regulation, something like that, you should do a full cost benefit analysis of some sort. And we're really lacking that. Some of the benefits are questionable, to be honest, with lockdowns. And the cost, though, is undeniable, particularly with small businesses who are just getting crushed. I mean, this is the third round of this. It's the 2 weeks to flatten the curve has turned into 14 months. It's insufferable. So we're going to get to them and have some great discussions later on, and it'll be something to look forward to. I'll show you some of the scenes. You know what? I want to go into some good news, actually. I'll start that because I tend to complain and go on about the bad stuff. I want to thank Peter McCaffrey for grabbing this. If there's nothing else that Alberta Health Services has done, they do have excellent data on the website. You can go on there. You can see infections, vaccinations, deaths, ICU levels as well. I mean, some stats I showed with the massive spike in opioid deaths that started by no small coincidence at the same time as the pandemic and has stayed up there. But you can look for yourself. People keep saying, do the research. Well, we've been doing it, and Peter did it. So this chart, if you look, this is over like a whole year here. I know it's a little faint, but the lines make it so nice and distinct. You can see the first wave way back. It really lets us know how relatively small that was, but it was concerning. We didn't know what the heck this thing was. We didn't know what was going on. You can see the spikes. The red line is deaths. The blue line are cases, okay? So there was a rise there, and then early fall, there was another rise. Then we saw the big one in December. That's that big giant mountain in the middle, and you can see the terrible correlation. I mean, this thing is real, okay? The cases spiked up heavily, and then, shortly after that, just following that, the deaths followed. But now look at this latest wave. Look how striking that is. Deaths not only are not following the cases are shooting up. There's no doubt about it. It's going around, but people aren't dying. And that is the most important part. People aren't dying. In fact, the deaths are dropping. The last report yesterday was of 2 people in Alberta dying out of 4.4 million people. Like that, it's tragic for those 2 people. But I mean, there's a long stretch to say if we close enough cafes and hairstylists and gyms that those 2 people even would have been saved. But look at that number. I mean, so now we're getting on to even if, and that's a big stretch, the lockdowns would stop those little amounts of deaths that are still happening, would it be worth the cost? We've really got to start having that discussion. Now, 2 months ago, Texas fully opened up. They said, we're done. It's trending the right way. We got the vaccines coming. We're opening up. No more mask legislations, no more business restrictions, nothing. We're doing the full works, 100% open. That's a tweet right there from the governor of Texas yesterday. The experts went wild. I mean, we watched them on social media. We watched them on CNN. Oh, Texas, they're so irresponsible. They're reckless. They're crazy. They're going to kill people by the hundreds of thousands. It's going to be a disaster. It didn't happen. It didn't happen. And now people are making the excuses. Well, it's because Texas had vaccinations. No, don't start rewriting this, guys. They were 14% vaccinated when they opened up. Far less than we are today. So again, we've got to look at real working examples. This isn't a new pandemic anymore. This thing's an agonizing 14 months old. And we're seeing some very interesting numbers coming out, a lot of which, it's nice being next door to the United States for a number of reasons. But one of the big ones is we've got a big working example of all sorts of different levels and types of lockdowns and restrictions. And nobody can really find a good correlation between government lockdowns and reducing the deaths and infections. It's been striking. I mean, you can make a correlation between the lockdowns and crushing the economy, and you can make it between the correlation between that and suicides and opioid addictions. But doing the lockdowns has not necessarily made much of an impact on infections and deaths. And we've got to keep that in mind. And then people say, oh, look at New Zealand. Well, great. If we were a tropical island that had shut our borders right off the bat and imprisoned our citizens on there for a year, we could have pulled that off. But we aren't. We've got to get realistic here. We're a country with a big border. The stuff's already here. And it's just unavoidable. Let's work with what we've got. So, I mean, it was reported just today out of England, Ireland, and Scotland. They had 0 deaths today out of all 3 of them. 0 deaths. And, I just want to go back to that chart again. I'm going to go to where I know some people are going to get a little upset with me, because what it does tell us is a few things, though. The infections are going up. They are spiking. I know some people might feel otherwise, but the pandemic is real. The infections are really going around, and it's really rising right now. The deaths are going down. That's undeniable. The reasoning for it is because we've vaccinated the vulnerable. That's the bottom line. People are still catching COVID-19, but we know things we've learned out of 14 months of this. We're lucky as far as diseases and pandemics go. This leaves 99.9% of the population alone, or it doesn't leave them alone, but they recover just fine. And the long hauler thing, there's not much medical evidence to show that it has that much long-term effects more than any other sickness. I mean, some people will get long-term effects. Some people will get long-term effects from a flu. Every type of sickness can be potentially dangerous. What we're seeing now are younger outliers, again, often with prior conditions. It's not saying they should be dead, but we've got to get to a point of understanding whether or not the lockdowns are worth it. But the vaccinations are important, and that's in my view. Now, that's a big contentious area. I'm vaccinated. I'm going to follow through with it. The only thing that would keep me from getting vaccinated, and I said it before, is if the government made it mandatory. Then I get ticked off. I dig my heels in and say, no, forget it. I'm not doing it. But I do not want to see it mandatory. I will never support it being mandatory. I respect other people's choices in choosing not to get vaccinated. If you don't want to, that's fine. Just as long as enough of us do, I'm okay with it. If you're concerned about it, so be it. I don't want to go into the extended discussions on vaccines. I see some numbers that are pretty stark. I believe, and I'm online with the others, that the reason we're seeing those deaths drop down again is because we vaccinated the vulnerable. What we messed up with very early in this pandemic, we didn't know, was realizing that, we need to isolate. I mean, prior to vaccinations, we needed to isolate the vulnerable. We need to separate them. But instead, we tried to quarantine the healthy. We tried to separate the healthy. And then people whine and can't watch this bullshit. Well, go away, Jody. I mean, I'm sorry. I'm not here to agree with everybody all the time. I'll put out what I do. You don't have to agree with me. I'm sorry if it doesn't work out for you. I'm certain there's somewhere where you can find an echo chamber that will soothe your feelings a little more. As it stands, I wanted to put out what I do feel is good news, though, because what we're seeing too then is less and less reason for the state to continue with these restrictions. There's really not much reasoning for it. There's no excuse. It's not making much difference on the pandemic itself, but it's making a heck of a difference against our economy. So last weekend, we did have some great things. We've got Nadine Wellwood going around. She's been doing video interviews. She covered things over at the Whistle Stop Cafe there, where we saw, again, a cafe owner, handcuffed, taken away, arrested for trying to serve cheeseburgers. That's the bottom line. This is what we're down to. This is ridiculous. I mean, he knew it was coming. Chris knew what he was getting himself into, but it's still what a scene, what a place we're in when restaurant owners are being arrested. Artur Pawlowski, again, he's a known, very vocal street preacher. He has his congregation. He got arrested out in the middle of the road in Calgary somewhere. That was another striking scene. I'm not a big fan of Artur, but he's got every right to put on his services. Of course, he made quite a dramatic scene of his arrest. At least Chris was peaceful about it. But again, he shouldn't have been arrested in the first place. And this is just going on and on. But we need to push back. You see, there are people, I'm already seeing the CBC stories. I'm seeing the other stuff. They're saying the fourth wave is coming now. Like, guys, people aren't even dying anymore, and you're already trying to scare people about the fourth wave. They're warning us about opening up too early. Well, that's why I showed Texas, because you guys sound just like they did when Texas opened up, and you were wrong. Texas is doing just fine. And some people say, oh, they're still getting 2,000 infections a day. They're not dying, guys. Texas has a population the size of Canada almost. I mean, we can't stay locked down forever. Some people really do seem to feel that. We got to get to zero. It's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. So we got to get it to a manageable level, which I contend we're already at the manageable level. We need to be lightening up on the restrictions. You know, we had the rodeo 2 weeks ago. Everybody said, oh, you wait 2 more weeks, and everybody's going to die. Well, it's been 9 days now or something. Nobody's, the infections haven't taken off from the rodeo. No connections. It's not the super spreader that everybody lit their hair on fire about. But the rhetoric is something else. And, but again, we got to push back. We got to be rational. I mean, we don't need people goose stepping around with tiki torches. We don't need idiots walking around with Nazi flags. And we've seen that. Unfortunately, that feeds the real jerks in the mix here. So, yeah, Naheed Nenshi decided to go off on one of his rants. You know, we're not going to be ridden ahead when he's done as mayor. Rest assured, he's arranging a soft landing somewhere. Something it might be Senate, something he might run for member of parliament, wherever it might be. I'm afraid we're not getting rid of Naheed as easily as you might think. He's just not going to be the mayor anymore. But he's calling it white nationalist supremacists protesting lockdowns. Really? You know, why? Why do you have to go there? What is this? It's nothing to do with any of that crap. You know, I'm getting sick and tired of that. I think just about everybody's sick and tired of that. But that's where it ends up. Is this the best case you've got? You try to just make it so shameful to appear at one of these because you're going to accuse everybody who's there of being a white nationalist. I've been to these protests. I've been to the rodeo. I've been to ones in Calgary. I had questions about them, that's for sure. I found that there are a number of some pretty out there folks who attend some of those things. Some of the speakers go off on some crazy tangents, but they aren't white supremacists. You know, it's BS. It's divisive, inflammatory crap. I guess it's kind of par for the course for Nenshi, but it's just insufferable, intolerable. Naheed, you're calling a number of people, and there were people of every race at those functions. You're calling them white nationalists. That's what you're doing. That's how irrational and sick what you're doing is. How insulting is that to some of the individuals who attended those protests, who were people of color, who have endured some real racism, to have a jackass like you say that they're a white nationalist. You know, it's as bad as the left when they're calling Jewish people Nazis. Stop it. Let's tone this down. Let's look at the numbers. People keep saying follow the science. Well, that's why I'm showing the charts. That's why I'm showing the numbers in Texas. The science says this thing is going down. The science says the vaccines are working. The vulnerable have been protected. People aren't dying. But people are going broke. People are stressed out. People are losing their houses. People are losing their businesses. That's real. And we have to look at these costs as we evaluate whether or not we're going to keep going with these restrictions. So, as I said, Nadine Wellwood's been on the ground. She did some fantastic videos. She interviewed Chris Scott shortly before he was arrested. So, I mean, if you go to our YouTube page, you know, look up the Western Standard on YouTube. Make sure to subscribe. You know, that's when you'll catch these live broadcasts. Plus, we upload those specials when we do go out and cover things in person. She interviewed Chris Scott shortly before he was arrested, and she interviewed Ty Northcott, who held the rodeo last week. The RCMP had been trying to get a hold of Ty for some time, and they did get a hold of him. They're going to come by his place apparently at 1:20 this afternoon and formally have him charged for having held that rodeo. It's going to be interesting to see when these things, if and when these things ever actually get to court and full examination and discovery, to really get that evidence. I mean, John Carpay has been pretty clear about that, and a number of the lawyers. Let's get this a light shining on it. Then let's talk about it. Let's get this in front of a judge in a controlled atmosphere with real legal debate, using some stats and numbers, and see if it's justified stepping on people's individual rights. And they are. You know, the charter says we have the rights to gather, to do this commerce, to go from province to province. Those are charter protected rights. Under Section 1, it can be suspended in a case of such a dire circumstance, such a huge emergency. They can suspend those charter rights. And that has to be justified. It's backwards. The government should be coming to us and asking if they can suspend those rights and then doing it, not to the case of putting it in there and then we have to fight to get our rights back. It's backwards. And I think the government knows that. I do think that's why they keep charging people, dragging it out, and then dropping the charges when it actually is about to get into a courthouse. But hopefully we're coming to the tail end of this thing. The leaves will come out in another few weeks at the rate they're going. The snow will stop here in Calgary within a few days with any luck. And maybe we'll have some remnants of a decent summer. So I've got a couple of the panelists here. I'm going to bring them into the show. So I've got Colin DeWolf and Rob Patton.
Yeah, you're pretty close. Yeah.
I could be destroying the pronunciation. I believe, Colin, you run a gym out in Medicine Hat?
Yes, I do, yeah.
Yeah, and Rob is running a Metropolitan Bartending School, I believe?
That's correct, yeah.
Yeah, and I was going to have Natalie Klein. She hasn't quite popped in yet. She's a hairstylist from up in Innisfail. She may come into the show here yet. Sometimes things get delayed. That's the way things go in their life. But I'm glad I have both of you guys on. I really appreciate it because I want to talk to people who've been directly impacted and different businesses, some that have been hit harder than others, particularly direct services. So like Colin, gyms, we don't hear enough about them. And I know they've just been devastated by the restrictions. And here you are again, you're barely hanging in there. How have things been going for you?
Well, for us, we're kind of at that point where 8 months out of the last 14, we've effectively been virtually closed with no options to really gain income or revenue into the business, right? So with my gym, we've rented equipment, we've done all the online programs, but still that's just a fraction of what we normally make in that window, right? So I'll give you some financial numbers there. So we just applied for the Alberta grant that was released, the $10,000 grant in April there. And they based it off our January 2020 numbers to January 2021. So for gyms, that's the big month. That's where we pay like multiple months rent, things like that. So January 2020, we had about $34,000 on the books. January 2021, because of the restrictions, we had $1,300 on the books. So that was a $32,000 revenue loss, or effectively 96% of what my business makes in 1 month. And we only qualified for up to 50% of the $10,000 grant. So a $32,000 loss. And at most, we will get up to $5,000 at some point. I don't know, we've applied for it, but we haven't seen the money yet, right? And with the current restrictions now, it's back to the same boat where it's just no option to work with our clients to allow people access to our services, really, right? And the online services aren't going to cut it for most businesses, right? Because our business is a physical business that is predicated upon letting you in to utilize our equipment to do your thing, right? If you don't have that equipment, what are you paying for? So it effectively eliminates the option of us to do business, right? So one of the ways we were looking at kind of getting through this, because obviously, the writing was on the wall, we went out and we spent a bunch of money setting up, because we have a fenced off backyard area at our gym. So I went out and I spent a bunch of money getting outdoor speakers and, rubber mats for the outdoor area, because, according to the science, being outdoors is safe, right? There's very little instances of outdoor transmission. And I can't even train someone one-on-one in a 2,500 square foot backyard. So that's kind of some of that, right? So like our ability to provide for ourselves has literally been taken away.
Yeah, no, they've made it illegal for us to earn a living is what they've done, and thrown out, programs and things and said, well, we can help you through it. Well, again, it's been 14 months. I mean, the fixed costs aren't going away. The lost traffic isn't going away. The staff on standby, I mean, they might be moving along. I mean, there's just so many levels. These Band-Aids aren't even coming close to repairing the damage caused. At best, the few businesses remaining are just on life support. Rob, I'm trying to remember where I took my bartending courses. When I bought the pub 7 years ago in a masochistic endeavor, I ran that for 5 years. And And that's part of why I feel so much for small businesses, because I've been through it. I mean, that's a tough industry at the best of times. And in the case of during this pandemic, it's just a horror story. I can't imagine. So when you're training people for the service industry, I imagine that demand for your services are rather down right now.
Yeah, I mean, basically, the bottom has fallen out. And I think we face two big challenges. One is we want to run a marketing campaign to get more students, but if we're going to be closed in a month, then that's a waste of money. The other challenge is I think students don't want to register just now because they're afraid they might not have a job when they graduate. And those are, so we get that. And to Colin's point, there's businesses out there spending all this money to adapt and evolve, and then they get shut down. We purchased the Metropolitan School of Bartending December 2019. So literally months before the pandemic hit. And so we've been closed about as much time as we've been open. So it's terrible. And I come from the hospitality industry, so we've revamped the curriculum. We've added a whole bunch of stuff. We've added table service in there as well, not just bartending. So when you graduate, you're going to be well trained to work in any venue, regardless if they hire you on as a server first and then bartender, or go right to bartender. You'll have all the skills you need, and yet we can't open our doors.
Yeah, well, and I understand. I mean, when people go drive down the street and they see every second restaurant with a for lease sign out front of it, it's just not a trade you're going to focus on training yourself in, which is terrible. And as you pointed out, and as others are, I say with Colin, it's not just a loss. It's not just loss of revenue, but so many businesses have invested a whole pile of money in order to become compliant with new regulations. I mean, I've seen all those wooden patios built all across the city outside of breweries and things like that. I mean, the cost of wood these days alone, I mean, these are really expensive expansions, and they were open for 2 weeks in that state, and now they've been shut down. They can't even put people on those patios, and they're just out that much more money. So like Colin, gyms, you said they've been trying to expand and moving along, but I guess your options are just really limited, right?
Yeah, like our business, much like what Rob's is predicated off people having the ability to come in the door, right? So you've taken that away, and the online stuff, our community likes it, it keeps them engaged, but it's not something that they're willing to pay very much money for, right? And even at that, our community is feeling the effects of this, right? So in my location, so I'm in Medicine Hat, we've had about 18, 19 COVID deaths at this point. Well, we have had a just immense amount of suicides and stuff like that. So a bunch of guys from my gym actually started an organization called the Inner Man Project, which is basically promoting men's mental health and stuff like that, right? Because it was something that absolutely had to be done. Out of my location specifically, we've had 2 gym members that have either overdosed or committed suicide in this process, right? And that's a very small community. So it's something where I very personally felt the effects and seen the effects on our community, right? The conversations I'm having with our gym members, they're crying, they're upset, their mental health is diminishing. They don't agree with a lot of this. And it's something that physical fitness and moving your body in a way you know how to do it is very important to your health and wellness overall, right? It gives you that sense of wellness, and that's basically been robbed from people multiple times through this, right? And it's at the point now where you can see the look on people's faces and how discouraged they are and how this is impacting them, right? You have those conversations with people, and it's just absolutely heartbreaking, right? So I don't know.
I would say by nature, as humans, we're fundamentally social creatures, right? We want that interaction. So this is, for the extroverts among us, this is a very serious impact. The introverts are like, oh, fine, I'll just hang out by myself. But the extroverts are like, what do I do?
No, it's very important. And I mean, one of the areas, again, getting back to Nenshi, who I was ranting about earlier, it doesn't take me much to get ranting about Nenshi, but some might remember some statements he made a little while back talking about saying there's no measurable benefits from workouts or gyms and we're not losing anything from them. He actually said that. Now, I can only guess, but he doesn't look like one who takes advantage of gyms terribly often, so perhaps he doesn't understand. But there is, I mean, I know that for stress relief, I'm not much of a gym goer, but if I'll go out hiking and get some serious physical exercise, you feel better afterwards. You relax afterwards. It's an improvement. And people don't have hiking at their disposal sometimes, or they prefer getting into a gym, getting around others, or they might need training to work out correctly. I mean, we are losing getting back to that cost benefit. When people can't get out and get that sort of exercise, they are going to suffer a physical and a mental cost from it. And we haven't been talking about that.
Yeah, like to back that point up, there is an immense body of scientific literature that goes over the benefits of physical exercise being just as effective as antidepressants in a lot of cases. The hormonal response from exercise, right? The proper cortisol and endorphin responses leveling out the way your system works. It actually promotes a general sensation of wellness long after you've exercised, right? So for all those people that set their day up by working out at the start or in the middle after, or at the end after a stressful day of work, you're stealing that sense of wellness from people that is just garnered by exercise, right? Like it's very disheartening to see people kind of crap on our industry when everyone that's in this industry knows how much we touch people's lives. And it's one of those things where you get people that are not well. They have health conditions, diabetic, all sorts of things. And then over the course of a year, so like the length of this pandemic, you could have radically changed your health status for the better, feeling better about yourself, contributing to society better because of it, and also protecting yourself from COVID. And, in the fitness industry, there's a huge amount of stigma and barriers for people to get it, right? Which is one of the reasons why we are dealing with like the obesity epidemic in North America, right? So we have this general sense of like, we're going to promote all these unhealthy things, and it's very stigmatic for people to even walk in a gym at times to start working on bettering themselves. And that's essentially all we do is better ourselves at the gym, right? Health, mentality, just everything, right? So it's very disheartening to see our industry constantly under attack through this.
And I can speak as being a bartender on the mental health side of that. So often people would come in and dump their problems, talk to the bartender and say, what do you think I should do, right? So we're like unofficial counselors in a way, helping people to get through their day, more on a mental side and Colin more on the physical side, right? So we're losing a whole bunch of support systems that people had, and they no longer have that in place.
Well, absolutely. And as you said earlier, Rob, it's in our nature. We're social animals. We get together. Different people choose different areas where they're going to socialize. Like, I'm not a religious man, but I understand that the faith community, for some people, it might not even be the spiritual aspect so much as this is the weekly gathering with their social peers. That's what's valuable to them. They've lost that. Like, there's so many things you can't replace online. And as I owned my bar and back in my drinking days, there are certain people, you call them the bar flies, they're the regulars, or you call them the chronics, whatever you want, but they show up and they will line the bar, almost every day. And these are people there because that's their outlet. That's when they get out of the house. Like, I really worry for some of the ones who used to come to my past bar. I know that was the only social outlet they had. And since the pandemic began, bar front service has not been allowed. It is, you could sit, we've had on and off table service and things, but not that sitting with some camaraderie around others, talking to the bartender, talking to the other fellow who came to the bar or whatnot. And again, this is a serious social cost as well. I mean, we're talking about bettering ourselves, as Colin said, training ourselves. I mean, this is an opportunity. If people are changing jobs, if things are happening, bartending is a trade. You've got to know what you're doing to do it well. And this would be an ideal time for people to increase their levels so they could get into a new line of work. But right now the schools are shut down.
Yeah, schools and pubs. And I mean, we get lots of that. I'm recently laid off, or I'm retired. I want to do something else, try a different thing. For some of them, it's their new social thing to do is to become a bartender, right? And now you're in the middle of that social arena. right? For others, it's like, I just got laid off. I need to do something else. I've always wanted to be a bartender, so let's give it a go. Yeah, and so Cory, to your point, we used to call them orphans because they have nowhere else to go. They come to the pub and they hang out and they interact with each other. They interact with the bartender, and that's their social event. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, go back to that old Billy Joel song, the Piano Man. But when you listen to it, it's a whole tune. Just it's kind of laying out the whole different regulars and types of people who hang around in a bar. And that final line, it's not much, but it's better than drinking alone. And that's always been. That's why since medieval days there were pubs and gathering places, public houses. And again, if people have lost that ability, if they can't comfortably go to a bar, I'm still comfortable with them, but I can't drink any longer due to abusing my privileges for too long. And it took me a lot of time, and that's another thing with AA meetings. Addicts and people in trouble with that. Like I don't think Zoom meetings for my AA would have been as effective for me as they were when I was working in the States mostly and traveling to get into that community hall or that church basement or whatever, drink that crappy coffee, but be with a bunch of people in the same circumstance as myself and have a healthy night. And for other people I know from working in the oil field, because we had a lot of addiction issues, guys take up healthy habits at night to get away from it. And gyms actually, as they traveled, were a large part of it. If they get back from the field, when normally they'd go to the bar, they're going to go work out instead. And again, they've lost that ability.
Yeah, that's actually something that we've seen a lot of too, right? Because like being in an industry, typically people that suffer from addiction in one regard will replace it with another addiction, right? So we actually have quite a few people at our facility, or like other, just being in an industry for a decade, you've seen those people that were alcoholics, had drug addiction issues, and they supplemented it. They decided that was not for them, and they swapped that addiction for leading a healthy lifestyle, which betters themselves and betters their community around them, right? Strong people, confident people that are doing good for themselves tend to pull everyone around them up, right? So that's something that we've seen kind of missing, right? Like you have those conversations with people, and it's that actively working as a group to be better as a group is good for your community, right? So and that's something that we definitely feel in our community.
And the economy as well, right? So now you're positive and you're productive, as opposed to being, you could say, a drain on the economy and costing resources, whether it be police or EMS or any of those things. Now you're taking that stress off of those services and becoming productive. That's benefit all the way around.
And when we've been showing a lot of the healthy aspects, and I mean, it's something that's been neat talking to you guys, getting into, because it's just these don't get discussed, the social impacts on people that aren't getting out. And it's too bad Natalie couldn't make it today, but she runs a hair salon, and as we know, actually those are social spots for a number of people too. You see that whether it's the old classic barber shop where the old fellas will sit in circles and talk BS all day, or it's stereotypical. Sometimes it'll be ladies sitting around, but it's the hub to chat and see others and socialize. It's more than just getting the hair done. Go to the gym is more than just working out, and going to the bar is more than just consuming booze, because we can do just about all of those things at our homes, yet we've developed entire industries to do them outside, and there's a reason for that. And those industries are all in terrible, terrible trouble. So, Colin, would you know, though, like I know we can see the closed restaurants everywhere. It's just devastation, and more that are coming. How many in your industry have you seen gyms that have just thrown up their hands and given up?
Well, I've personally had a few friends that have closed their facilities. And then within that, like I know one of Alberta's oldest, biggest fitness company, International Fitness Holdings, or the old World Health and Spa Ladies, their parent company, their investor group just declared bankruptcy a week or two ago, which, the writing was kind of on the wall for that. But I think they had about like 17 locations across Calgary, right? So they're looking for new investors and stuff like that, right? So it's happening. Like, people are at their limit, and even us, like we're kind of at the limit. Like, what I would kind of say to people is like, consider being in a position where for 8 months in the last year, you have had zero household income. Explain to me how, but you're still responsible for your bills. how do you think your household would be doing at that point, right? And that's apply that to the business now, right? So all the restaurants that have been operating at losses all year, and then, you know, with the brief windows where they can actually, you know, have people come in and make a little bit of money, you're just kind of recovering losses, you know, covering your debts that you've accrued, right? So like coming out of this, basically this is my last opportunity. We've actually had some members of our community step up and help us out, right? Like we had a local guy that his business hasn't been impacted, offered to pay 1 month's rent for us, which was, you know, very heartwarming because we announced that we were essentially going to close. And we've been in the community for about, like our karate club, because we also own a karate club, has been in the community for about 3 decades almost. Wow. And our gym has been there for almost a decade now. So it's one of those things that we've been stressed. Like I haven't been able to pull income. I actually have a second full-time job now, working for an American company online, doing training and nutrition, because throughout the States, I can actually reach people there. But yeah, no, it's like we've done everything. So like while I'm open, I have 2 full-time jobs that I'm working because I can't pay myself. I haven't had an income out of my business for quite some time. So I've had to take that second job. My wife has as well, because we're in this together, right? Like this is our sole source of income. And it's not like we're fabulously wealthy. You know, we have a small home in Medicine Hat. You know, it's really sad. And our community's been taken away from us, essentially, is what it is as well. But
I think, Colin, you raise a great point. As small business owners, not only are we not able to hire and employ people, we are now in the marketplace taking jobs that would have otherwise gone to other individuals, right? And so that's the choice we have, because we're trying to support keep our business afloat and put food on the table. So, you know, we're losing employment and we're taking other jobs that we would like to see go to other people. It's because I'm in the same boat. I work full time and I have this business that is closed.
Yeah, it's rippling everywhere. So in the areas of like private education, specialized things such as what you do, Rob, has your industry qualified for some of the subsidies or aids or loans?
Yeah, we do qualify for the rental subsidy. So we've been getting that. So what is that? That covers our rent. We still have utilities and taxes and, you know, all of the other things that are associated with running a business. You still need to buy supplies, even though you're closed. It's like, well, at some point you're going to reopen, and you know, you can't run a business with zero supplies. So there's a lot of that. It's just, I mean, and our facility is downtown Calgary, and so we pay downtown Calgary rent, unfortunately, commercial rent. So it's brutal.
Yeah, well, and the subsidies and aids, you know, it's funny. You listen to the leader of the opposition in Alberta, who screamed and screamed and screamed, lockdown, lockdown, lockdown. And then once the lockdown came, why aren't you supporting businesses enough? Well, okay. And, you know, the thing is, too, it's our own money. I mean, a lot of people seem to forget that. There really is that myth in people's minds that the government just has this big money bin and they can just dig out and feed it to us at will when they need to. No, they're using our credit cards to hold us up here. There's going to be a cost for this later. And these businesses are hanging by a thread. Like I know at the restaurants and bars, they're open, but I believe it was the CFIB. They said it was something like in Alberta, over 300,000 was the average that restaurants took on in debt last year. You know, the subsidies have to end for the wages soon. The subsidies for the rent have to end soon. And a lot of these businesses won't be in a position to keep operating when those subsidies are gone. And people don't realize there's going to be another wave. And I don't think it's going to be pandemic. It's going to be business closures when those subsidies stop, because, you know, if we can't get it rolling again fast enough, that they won't be able to recover from it.
Yeah.
But
yeah, I think a lot of times what's happening is like you said, Cory, all these businesses are taking on additional debt to stay afloat that they'll never get out of. They're just digging a deeper hole. And I'm sure you can attest to this as a pub owner, as a restaurant operator. A lot of times those margins are very thin. And so you go 2, 3, 4 months with no revenue. It's like, we're done. That's it. It's over.
Well, yeah, you've got to keep a good bunch of money in the bank just for cash flow. You got to keep it for payroll. You've got to keep liquor stock. You've got to keep food stock. I mean, you can't just come from a dead stop and get rolling again. It takes a big chunk of money every time you do that. And as you said, the average margin in Canada, according to Stats Canada, it's just not my anecdote from being in the pub business, is 5%. You think of how many friggin' burgers you got to sell to make a living on a 5% margin. You know, you get better margins on the liquor, but I mean, you're going to take loss leaders in food. It's just a tough industry. And I listen to some folks, and I know it makes the vein in my head pulse. So it doesn't take a lot to get me going. But you listen to business experts online saying, well, you know, you can just do takeout. That's fine. That'll hold you in there. And you know, you can. No, guys, that's a Band-Aid. That keeps your cook rolling, perhaps. But you're not making much money off that stuff.
And the other problem with getting back up from zero, if you're closed, now there's an enormous amount of stress put on the distribution network. So you might not be able to get your full food delivery once you reopen because they have to supply all of the people in their delivery route. So you'll get half a delivery, next guy gets half a delivery, and then next week you'll get the other half because they can't give everyone their full order. A, they don't have it in the fridge in the warehouse, and B, they don't have the capacity in the trucks to make those deliveries.
Yeah, no, it's the supply chains are going to be stressed again whenever the heck we open up. And again, those fixed costs. So, I mean, so your slow season's approaching with the gyms, though, I guess, Colin, you were saying, because you make the bulk during the winter when people are kind of cooped up, right?
Yeah, well, typically when it's nice out, people go outside a little bit more, right? You know, and that was the one thing, too, like, because this has been closed a lot through the winter, we set up the outdoor area, right? And it was, people were excited, like, oh, you know what, like, cool, we'll work outside in the sun, we'll get to enjoy the outdoors while we do this. And yeah, it was just kind of kiboshed, right? And like, I definitely, you know, looking around Medicine Hat here, all of our pubs, cafes, everything like that just set up outdoor patios. And I'm like thinking, like, my cost was this. I know theirs was more because they set up these really nice fancy wood patios. And then it breaks my heart to know that everybody's trying their hardest and like they're still getting, it doesn't matter what you do at this point. It is kind of what the message the government's sending to people, right? We don't care how hard you're willing to try. We're still going to shut you down no matter what, right? And no fault of your own. Like I've had to run contact tracing a couple times in my facility, never had a case of transmission within the facility, and still shut down, right? You know, and every time AHS phones me about it, the person that found out they were positive has already reached out to me because it's a small community. I know everybody in my facility. I've run contact tracing already. Like the last instance, everybody was already tested before AHS even phoned them, right? So they're already isolating and testing anyone that might have come in contact with that person. So, but we've been doing our best, and it still doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's part of the frustration too. I mean, they're cracking down on those who have been stringently following the rules. I imagine there were restrictions in your schools as well, Rob. You know, to sanitize things, wear masks, keep people separate from each other. And have we seen any evidence that there's been spread from schools or learning institutions of any sort?
We've had no instance of any even contact tracing. So we're lucky in that regard. I mean, primarily our main demographic is 18 to 24, which I believe hasn't been affected as significantly as, you know, the older folks, even 35 and over, 55 and over. Or I don't really keep track of the stats, but my understanding is the younger ages haven't been affected as heavily. But at the school, we have 10 stations. So during this, we've only been offering every other station to give that 6-foot distance between each other. So we're only operating at 50% capacity for a while, and then lockdowns come, so we're closed, and then reopen at 50% capacity. So, you know, how would your pub operate if it can only generate 50% of revenue, right? I mean, like you said, it's only, so now you're relying on 2.5% based on the statistic you mentioned earlier to survive. That's brutal.
Yeah, no, a lot of your fixed costs don't come down, and likewise in the gyms, like you're kind of starting to call it. So there's not been really evidence that gyms have been a hot point of spread or transmission or anything, is it?
So there was an organization that did a FOIP request out of Doug Schweitzer's office back in January, and so for the 6 months of operation, they came back and they linked 45 cases total over 6 months of operation to every gym in Alberta. So like 45 out of what are we at, like almost 200,000 now, something like that. Like that's, I think you're kind of missing the forest through the trees when you're shutting that down. And the whole thing is like, oh, these are super spreader places because they're doing this, and the data doesn't support that. The only one that I've ever seen where there's been a long chain of transmission, right, which they follow it not just within the facility, but going on and they attack all those cases onto it, is the one out of Quebec. So there was a Quebec City gym that had it, right? And then you have gyms like down in New Jersey that have been open the whole time, defying orders, and no cases out of that place, right? One of the Alberta fitness institutions basically did a check-in analysis. So out of all the check-ins, like 4.5 million check-ins, there was this many cases of COVID, which was like 0.00004 chance of contracting it in the facility, which is insane, right? Like, so the instance has been so small, and yet we're heavily penalized. And I know, like, here's some, like, if you want a personal note. So while my gym was closed in February, I watched the news report 50 new cases of the variant fly in 1 week, right? So I'm closed, I have no option to work, and they're allowed to just keep flying people in. Not that anybody should lose their job, and I think we're kind of looking at, very minimal things and blowing them up to be these big things. And I'm like, how is that even possible that you can actively be flying in these more deadly, more contagious variants, and I can't earn a living, right? Because I think people miss the boat as well. It's like, we're talking lives and livelihoods. Your livelihood is your ability to provide the necessities of life for yourself and your family. And we have actively decided that some people do not deserve that right now. And that is a very scary premise. Where, like, could you imagine if someone walked into your house and said, sorry, you're not allowed to feed your family. You can't earn a living to feed your family with what you do. Sorry, too bad, right? And, like many business owners, like, my life savings is tied up in that business. That's my retirement plan. That's my everything. So if someone is like walking in and telling me, I just need to be okay with giving it away, right? And that's incredibly scary.
No, and unfortunately, we've, it's a much bigger, longer discussion, but we have a large segment of the population that have guaranteed tax-funded incomes. They're civil servants. They have jobs, some important, some, well, we could talk, that's a separate discussion as well, but they haven't been directly impacted. These are a lot of the people who are supportive of these restrictions and lockdowns because they aren't looking outside of their own world. Well, I've stayed at home. I've had a full salary throughout. In fact, it's been kind of a nice staycation for a year, but they aren't looking outside of their bubble to realize, no, but some people are getting crushed, just crushed. And
So even on that, like, I know within our city of Medicine Hat here, there's been a tax shortfall because of everything. So our city is getting $15 million less taxes sent to the city this year. So I know people, city workers that utilize my facility that have lost their jobs, that are taking other people's jobs because the union-based seniority, right? So they're actively, flushing people out from the bottom end, which are the people that just got in. And then I've been told that next year we're also looking at possibly another 10 million, right? So that's a whole bunch of these government secured income jobs that aren't secured, right? Like, our taxes as business owners, as people, pay for those jobs. Well, if you put the restaurant industry out of work, like, that's 200,000 people in the province. That's a lot of corporate tax. That's a lot of personal tax that is going to fund those government jobs, right? That's going to fund your hospital system, right? Like, you want to talk about, protecting the healthcare of people. Well, we need these people working to pay those tax dollars, because otherwise we're just printing money, and it's going to exacerbate the issue in the long run, right? So you want the healthcare system to be functioning in 2 years, you need people working to pay for that, right? And that's a lot of money.
And to add to that, Colin, all of those people, that 200,000 people who work in hospitality, are out spending their money in other small businesses. So they're in effect supporting all of these other businesses. So we're taking a huge chunk of the economy, basically throwing it away, which is going to have a ripple effect through all of these other businesses where they consume goods.
Yeah, exactly right.
Yeah.
Like we have a lot of nurses in our facility, and even that they're like, oh well, there's layoffs coming, and I'm like, in a medical emergency, we're looking at laying off nurses, and like that's insane. Like you should be training more, hiring more, and keeping the whole system afloat, right? And then you got companies like Amazon that are benefiting like crazy, and all that is taking Canadian money, sending it to the United States of America. So you want to talk about like helping our country, spend that at home, spend that at your local businesses, right? Because that's what's going to keep our system here afloat.
Yeah, and it's crushing local retail. That's a separate area. I wish I'd gotten a retail store owner on. I've talked to a couple, like one fella says, it's just killing them. Even with clothing, it doesn't matter. As people come into the store, it's a great spot to try it on, check it out. Then they put it back on the rack. They go home and they order it online because they can get it delivered cheaper. That's a little bigger, different issue. That's just been kind of a shift on how things are done, I think, around the world. But this pandemic has exacerbated that dramatically because of people staying in their homes and learning and getting into the habits of getting things delivered. And they're not going to go back to going out again after this.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Go ahead.
But a frustrating thing too with people pointing out what's an essential business and what's not. And yeah, as we're saying, a business is essential to the people who own it. I can guarantee you that. And it's essential to a lot of the people who work there. And again, people forget where it contributes elsewhere. Hospitality has been very, competitive. So, you're integrated, you're sponsoring kids' soccer teams, and you're involved in the community. At least if you're a good business person, you're going to do that because that's, how you just keep your good clientele and good relationships and all that going. We're losing that. We're losing those relationships with the business and the communities, the ones that are going to make it. And I think that's probably the same with the gyms and that too. Unfortunately, are the monsters, the mega ones, the ones that can take economies of scale, so it's the huge restaurant chains, it's the huge gym chains, because they can do that, but we lose those nice, smaller, community-based businesses that, again, the relationship between the business and the person is another aspect that gets lost.
Yeah.
So, run out of place to go. Where to go then, Chris, or Colin, what should the government do in your view right now then with where things are standing?
So looking at the situation from a distance, obviously we need to do something, right? So we need to protect our healthcare system to some extent, right? So if outdoor transmission hasn't been seen to be a big factor, allow that to happen, right? Because it's something like the science on it is pretty clear. And if you look to other jurisdictions too, right? So I have friends in the gym community in BC. They've been allowed to operate this full time indoors, no issues, right? You have your spacing, you do all that, right? And it's just it's been effective in other jurisdictions. So I feel and even in ours, I would argue that our, less than 50 cases or about 50, even if it was 100, let's double the cases. That is not a major driver for transmission of this thing, right? So I would say we have to look at reasonable ways to allow people to earn a living, right? Because like I said, that's how they provide the necessities of life. And when you start deciding who gets to, provide the necessities of life for themselves, that's a very, very morally scary position, right? I don't know, I find it terrifying. But I would say we need to bolster our healthcare system. Why hasn't that been enhanced? Why have we not increased capacities? We've had 14 months rather than dumping the millions of dollars, billions of dollars into our, industries that we decide should close. Why not dump that into healthcare? Why not come up with a simple rule of guidelines like other places have done, and just keep it consistent across the board, right? I feel like the government would get a lot more buy-in as well if it was consistent, right? If you had, even if it's 10% occupancy for every business, 2 meters distancing, the masking, whatever it happens to be, keep it consistent across the board and allow those businesses the same opportunity, right? Because right now they're picking winners and losers, and it's disgusting. It's honestly disgusting.
Yeah, it is. It really is to watch. And Rob, likewise in your industry, what things do you think the state could do aside from just backing off a bit?
Yeah, to me, like being outside, getting exercise, getting sunlight, right? That's going to be a huge help for your immune system. So for the hospitality industry, I mean, I know a lot of our partners in the industry, pubs, restaurants, all that, they've already installed the plexiglass barriers and they sanitize and all those things. So and now with patio season, I mean, now you're outside, you're getting that sunlight, you're socially distanced. So for me, I mean, I would really like to see the data behind what they're doing, shutting everything down and all those things, right? So as Colin said, okay, well, you've had less than 50 occurrences within the gyms. Well, I want to see the data behind pubs and restaurants. How many or which locations specifically are the hot spots? So close them, sanitize them, make sure they're following all of the guidelines, plexiglass barriers and all those things and sanitization. And the ones that have had no instances, open up and just make sure they follow all of the recommendations. I shake my head at what's going on right now. It baffles me.
Yeah, well, you don't shut down every pub in the city because two pubs were serving minors. You crack down on the ones that were serving minors.
Absolutely.
But part of our problem, and it's great, and it's a good idea. When we see the hotspots, we haven't seen really good reporting on, well, what went wrong, what fell through, how did that happen in those places? So what can we do to make sure it doesn't happen in others, aside from shutting places down?
So on that too, right? Like we're looking at controlling something that is, quite frankly, incredibly hard to control, right? An example that I would use, like if you're following logical processes, we have had an immense amount of outbreaks in care homes, in hospitals, in all those settings. And we're talking medical professionals that know all the policies, procedures, and they still can't manage to keep it under control in their house, right? So that's where we kind of get into the territory of like, does this even work? And if not, why are we doing it? And I don't know if you can see, Cory, but I linked in the private chat there a study that was just published out of Simon Fraser Valley University in Burnaby that goes over the lockdown efficacy. So this is the meta-analysis that goes over 80 other studies. So this is a lot of studies, scientific studies, compiled the data, and the conclusion in there is basically this does not work. And this is the most recent one published in April. So if you want to talk science and data, right, this is the most recent data out of their university in Burnaby, right, that was compiled. And for me, it's just like, if it's been shown 80 times, because the conclusion after 80 studies is it does not work. It does not work.
And I just, it's funny, you were just ahead of me. I just opened it up my side screen here, and I've pasted it into the comment link, people. So if you're watching and you look in the comments, you'll see the link to that document. It's a 55-page report, and it's right back to where I started. Because, we've really got to look at the cost benefit, and somebody has broken it down. It's worth digging into and reading that. And it's not the Fraser Institute, it's Simon Fraser University, so don't dismiss it. This is real stuff. So I appreciate that, Colin, because we need to just really look at the bigger picture here. And I think, as we were saying, part of it's people are panicked, people are afraid, and it's they've been yelling at the government to do something, do anything, just do something. I think that's a large part of it. They respond and will bring in arbitrary sorts of rules and regulations just to at least look like they're doing something. But they're doing
that's exactly where I feel we are. Is we're in a position where the government is doing things to seem like they're doing things because it might help, because we do not want to be accused of doing nothing. And that's exactly where we are, right? So they're doubling down on the same things that have been shown time and time again to not necessarily be effective, right? And if you take a look at the science, and there's a reason why we haven't been provided with the science, is because a lot of it is the opposite of what they've done, right? Someone pointed out to me that the World Health Organization guidelines for fitness was 1 meter distancing, not 2, not the 3 that we're under right now, but 1, and no mask. And so I was like, that is very odd. And again, I looked up another study that went over 200 other studies, and sure as crap, the data would support 1 meter distancing, not 2, not 3, but 1 meter, right? It's diminishing returns, right? after 3 meters, you might as well be 5 kilometers away. It doesn't matter. You might as well be in a different continent, right? So, yeah. But anyways, that's my take on the science that I've actually spent the time looking up.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Like I said, I pasted the link. And for those listening just to the audio on the podcast, I'm certain if you did a Google search, and it's a lockdown report, and it's with Simon Fraser University, and it's a COVID lockdown cost benefits, a critical assessment of the literature by Douglas Allen. So look it up. There's a lot of great information packed in there. That just matches with what we've been talking about. So I'll let you guys get going back here to try and do what you can with your businesses or your jobs and whatnot, and just hopefully very soon, some common sense prevails. I mean, as I showed at the start of this show, cases are still rising, but the deaths are just actually very minimal, which is good. It's very good news. Hopefully that trend keeps going, and the pressure. The governments respond to pressure, as we were saying. They're responding right now in a panicked way to try and lock things down just to look like they're doing something. Hopefully, if we can get more rational pressure pushing back at the government, say, open up, you're crushing us, they will budge and move eventually, and we can just start getting back to a reasonable, normal world again. So thank you both for coming on with me. Is there anything you'd like to say about your business there, Colin, before you go, or where to find you, or what you're up to?
Well, you can look us up, Back Alley Fitness, Medicine Hat. But yeah, no, we're just trying to make it through, man. We're at this point, we have to make the decision on whether we're going to fully stick it out or whatnot. Because personally, I can be okay with my other job, right? So I'm doing this for my community right now. We kind of made a Facebook post saying we may close our doors, and then we had about 120 comments on that. It was a very tear-filled evening reading those comments and what that gym actually meant to them. So at this point, we're absolutely 100% just fighting for our community, right? Because personally, I can go do my other job and I can be in the same position I am personally without it, right? But it's important to be part of this community, right? We've been told that time and time again. So.
Yeah, no, it's very personal. I mean, people put their heart and soul into their business. You've got everything in it, invested in it. We're not just talking about money. And it's just the pressures and damage are unreal. So I'm glad people have been supportive of you, and I really hope everything comes through, and we'll chat again. And when we do, it's when you're up and running again, and everybody's coming in droves and signing up to get rid of that COVID fat they built up from sitting around this long. So.
Yeah.
And Rob, with your school, as people do, hopefully we'll see. I think a hospitality sort of micro boom, though it'll take a while but people will get back in. I mean, we do need these businesses. People want them. There sure is certainly enough space to fill. So there will be opportunities if you're looking at the long game, and if people want to change. I mean, bartending really has a lot of fun aspects to it. Some crazy hours. So where can you find your business there?
So we're on the web, metropolitanschoolofbartending.com. We're also on Facebook, same handle. And we take all the safety precautions. We sanitize before and after every class. We offer daytime class, evening classes, and weekend classes. So lots of opportunities. And then once everything reopens, we also offer mixology seminars. And those are a ton of fun, a ton of laughs. You learn some stuff, you have a few drinks, lots of laughs. So hopefully we can start running those again and get people out and having a laugh. I think now more than ever we need to just have a laugh and enjoy ourselves and have a drink. And so I'm looking forward to everything reopening again and supplying our industry with very well trained new workers in hospitality.
Great. Well, thank you both for coming on, because it's important just to get it out there, get the other voices, because people don't understand. And it doesn't mean that they're being malignant or wanting to be cruel. They just don't necessarily know. They haven't been in that circumstance. They haven't owned a business, and maybe sometimes they're forgetting just the impacts that these have. They don't see it. And the more they can hear from people and see that there really are downstream impacts on people, very serious ones, through these restrictions and lockdowns, it just helps everybody get a bit more understanding. We're not all just greedy monsters who want to reopen and kill your grandma. We're people who are suffering terribly under these restrictions, and we're at a point where we think we can safely carry these businesses on without locking down further. So I look forward to talking to you guys again and in better circumstances. I'm sure, let's hope it'll be a better summer, guys.
Absolutely. Love to be back. Thanks for having me, Cory. Have a great day.
Thanks, Rob.
Have a good one.
Thanks, Colin. So yeah, that was a good, chat just to look. And I mean, that's just two out of thousands and thousands of business owners, little things we don't think about, we don't remember. I had the last time I had a panel on with some other individuals, and there was a lady who owned a dog kennel, a pet hotel. And of course, their business is at terrible risk because, people aren't traveling there, putting their dogs up for boarding. And again, you say, well, that's not necessary. Well, no, but do we really want to get into a world where the only things we're allowed to do are what is determined to be an absolute need? I mean, if you look at the very basic needs we have, it's food, shelter, water, and that's about it. Yeah, we could exist with that, but what a life that would be. What a miserable, pointless, sour existence. I mean, then you might as well be a prisoner. All of these things combined in our world, in our lives, those are needs. We need to get out. We need to socialize. We need to enjoy different types of foods. We need to work out outside of our homes. We are, we're not farmers and ranchers anymore getting our exercise in the fields. Don't tell me what's a need and what's not a need. We'll determine for ourselves what's essential and what's not essential. The government can't determine a bloody thing at the best of times. Okay, nothing ruins a good rant better than a computer crash in the middle of it. Thank you to you folks who are still hanging in there. There's that reminder. I got to get some better equipment here, and that's why we need sponsors and subscribers. So there's where I'll put my plug in for the standard before I get back to ranting. We don't take any tax funding. Advertising revenue is coming in, but it's not as great as it used to be. If you want to get your business or service on this show or any other show, though, by all means, get a hold of the standard. Get a hold of our sales guy. We can promote your product or service. The same with on the regular print edition, of course, the online edition, all that. Subscribe to the YouTube. Subscribe to Western Standard Online. It keeps us stable and solid. That reporting, getting people like Nadine Wellwood, by the way, I was talking before. She went out, for those who didn't catch the first part of the show, and interviewed Ty Northcott and Chris Scott. Ty's getting charged this afternoon. Chris got arrested last weekend. There's exclusive interviews on our YouTube channel. So have a look at that. So getting back to that, talking with our businesses again, though, and our owners, we need to humanize them. We need to make people realize there's people behind there. When you shut these things down, when you lock them down, there's a serious cost to those individuals, and we got to look at that. So I really appreciate that link to show that cost benefit thing. So I'll go into a couple more news items here as we're going, things just to get some more steam out of me and ranting, because our freedoms are under threat all over the place. And here we go, Gibbo. Warning that popular social media accounts could face censorship, because this is something that's sliding under the radar, everybody. C10. You might have heard a bit of it in the news, but not nearly enough. C10, that's the government trying to regulate the internet. They want the CRTC to take over the internet. They keep giving us doublespeak. They keep saying it's not going to impact small content producers. It's not going to impact individuals. BS. And, we keep seeing that when those quotes that slip out. It's those small producers, those small individuals are exactly who they want to go after. These are the individuals they want to shut up. These are who the people that they want to gag. So stand up, call your MP, get them on this. O'Toole's been bloody well useless. I hate to say it as a federal leader, but here's an issue he could sink his teeth into, hopefully. This is a freedom issue. We got enough freedom issues as it is with the pandemic going on and the government's crushing us all over the place. And then to have them going after our free speech while they're at it. Speaking of economic recovery, here's something our provincial government can get on, because Jason Kenney's certainly been having trouble and treading water for some time. Here's a story from the Standard. Regulatory quicksand holds back clean tech in Alberta. Things like well reclamation, new energy generation projects, things like that. People talk about it all the time, but they're still stuck under that gross, horrible regulatory mess and mire that we have in our province and federal government. Bureaucrats destroy business faster than anything else. The amount of approvals and processes and time drags out. We're sitting on all these resources. We can't get them out of the ground. We can't always just blame Justin Trudeau for it, or the BC government, or protesters, because Alberta actually has got some terrible regulations and red tape here too. We actually have a ministry for cutting red tape run by Grant Hunter. Not a bad guy, but I don't know if he's doing a really good job. First thing he should do is get rid of his ministry. How much more bureaucracy do we need? But this is Alberta, so let's not, forget. We're prone to having bad government as well, and capable of it, even if you want to put a conservative label in front of it. Patricia here said to sign Pierre Poilievre's petition regarding Bill C-10. It's on his page. Yeah, Pierre Poilievre is the effective leader of the opposition. O'Toole is just the one who actually holds the title. But Pierre has been 10 times the leader of that party that O'Toole has to date. And I don't believe Pierre has been supporting a carbon tax. But unfortunately, we are probably moving towards a Trudeau majority. This is a time, again, while we got to be working to entrench our rights, learning to stand up for ourselves. You think they're stepping on us now? Wait a little Pierre Jr. there gets a majority. Just imagine what he's going to do with us. I hate to imagine what he's going to do with us. We got a pretty good idea. So it's been a lively discussion in the comment section. I knew it would be. Again, there's a lot of points of views on the vaccinations, lockdowns, whether the pandemic exists, whether it doesn't. Everybody, and I respect free speech, so get it rolling. But if you start really getting vicious with each other on there, I'd rather, I'll have to block some folks. I mean, I love watching the interaction between viewers and listeners as we do these live shows. But please, let's keep it somewhat civil. We don't have to agree on there. Of course not. That's no fun. But, no really attacking each other, guys. Save it for Twitter. That's what that place is for. And rest assured, if you want to come after me, that's a great place where I'm more than happy to take it on. Cory B. Morgan on Twitter. So another aspect that does not get talked about nearly enough. I'm going to be cutting the show off bitterly today because I've got to drive for a few hours. I'm going to be interviewing a doctor, a physician, a medical practitioner, not of the many other types of doctors and so on, insists on full anonymity because this doctor has been treating with ivermectin people apparently with COVID-19 and is examining other alternative treatments, because we're not talking about treatment. An ivermectin, for example, it's not a new drug. It's not one that doesn't get used on people. It's used on people all the time. It's just for parasite control. It's used in the veterinary business massively. It's not a dangerous drug. I mean, anything, can be dangerous if you take too much of it or you do it wrong. But we've got this strange polarized discussion where we don't even talk about treatment. Apparently, everything with the pandemic comes down to either vaccination or dying. Well, in between, there are a whole number of people who actually catch this and recover. Or some who catch it and don't. Some who do catch it and die. Was there a treatment that could have saved them? Can we look a little more into this? I mean, we don't hear a lot about it, and I don't know a lot about it, to be honest. So talking to a practicing physician on this is going to be very enlightening. And the scary thing is that this physician is fearful that they will lose their license if it's found out that they're using an unapproved treatment for COVID. Now, not a dangerous treatment. Again, we're not, not injecting bleach or any insanity like that. It's a known drug. Maybe it doesn't even do any good. I don't know, but it's not doing harm. So why can't this be discussed? I think part of it is that it gets back to the respect for other opinions. We got into such a polarized world last year with Trump and everything else. And I'm not out to blame Trump. I'm out to blame the polarity. But Trump actually spoke of alternative treatments in the early part of the pandemic. And immediately that got the media and the academics and the left wing and everybody else screaming and piling on and basically demonized any discussion of alternative treatments. Danielle Smith, for retweeting something, got crapped all over when she was still with QR77 because she retweeted something that was talking about alternative treatment. Why? Like, shouldn't we be talking about these things? I mean, if it's causing danger or harm, well, that's a problem, absolutely. But that's not the case. It wasn't the case. But was it just this overwhelming, massive hatred, and it was hatred, and there's still a bunch of it, of Trump, is stopping people from looking, you don't have to like the guy, but sometimes something he said might have been right. So don't dismiss it. If we've got things that increase the chances of people coming out of COVID without consequences, let's look at them. So I'm going to drive out and I'm going to meet with this doctor. And as I said, the anonymity is critical. I mean, that's brutal. A person shouldn't lose their license unless they're really crossing a line somewhere, and that's not the case. So I'm going to be recording an interview with that doctor, and I'll be writing up on it. It'll be interesting to see what we learn and find out from that. So keep watching, and then tomorrow as well, we've got Nathan Gita. He's been doing those fantastic shows out of Prince George. It's called Mountain Standard Time. He's on between 10 and noon. He's on Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays. Wednesday at noon, I'll be jumping on with Derek and maybe Dave. We do the pipeline every Wednesday at noon. We chat and talk about the stories of the week. It's usually a fun chat, about a half an hour. Make sure to turn in for that. If you can't catch these full episodes, search out the Pipeline or the Western Standard on any of your regular podcast sites. You can download the audio and listen to this at your leisure. That's really been a growth area. Speaking of Daniel Smith and talk radio, I mean, as most of us know, talk radio has become pretty unlistenable these days. You can make a great substitute for that. Download these shows, give it a listen in your spare time. You don't always have to catch them when they're live, so make sure to get in on those. And feel free to contact me if there's any guests or subjects you want me to cover. It's there's always so much, but we want to remain focused. So I'm going to be back with the full show on Friday at 10 o'clock. We'll see who we round up. And that's enough for today. So thank you all for tuning in. I want to thank those guests again. The weather looks good today. It's supposed to be a little rainy later, but eventually we will get into a spring and summer. Hopefully it's legal for us to get outside and enjoy each other's company soon. I will see you on Wednesday.